Hey Lifehouse, I have the privilege to introduce the guest speaker today. He's become a really good friend of mine. He's an amazing golfer. It's why I put him on my team every year for the Columbia Golf Tournament. And he is also an amazing pastor. Will you give a warm welcome to Pastor PJ Moon?
Well, good morning. How are we doing? Good morning, good morning. Well, I will say I don't know if it's so much that I'm a good golfer that Ryan puts me on his team or if he's not as good of a golfer, but we'll let that be up for debate. But hey, good morning. Thank you for letting me be here. As I guess some of you may not know me, my name's PJ, and I've been part of this church for a really long time. I grew up in this church in high school. I'm almost this year is my 20-year high school reunion, so it shows you I feel like I'm getting old now. But I grew up in this church. I was here when I was in high school. There's a few people, a few faithful, still here at this church from the days before this building was even built. But this has been part of my life. This church has been part of my life and my upbringing and raising me up to be a man of God. And I moved away for several years, and so my wife and I are back. This is my first time really back at Lifehouse this last couple years. But this place means a lot to me, and I wanted to start just by first saying thank you to you as a church for believing in young people, for believing in the next generation, for loving and accepting people when they walk in. And I'm always, every time I get to be in this house, in this church, as I'm walking through, as I get to be part of events, if I get to be blessed to play in drums or even share my heart on a stage like this. I'm just so grateful for this church because you really impacted my life. You've made me chase after the things of God. You've helped me to grow in all of those things, and I'm eternally grateful. I have an amazing family, 2 little kids that love the Lord, a wife who loves the Lord, and it's a byproduct of this incredible church. So I just want to say thank you to you, and thanks for having me this morning. Can we give it up for this incredible church? I see the Garzones in the front row. The Garzones and I, we go way back because I remember I had to fix your, they're not very techie, and so I had to fix their computer one time in Skype, but love you guys so much. But hey, I want to talk today, my message this morning might be a simple one for some of you, but I pray that it would be challenging, encouraging, inspiring, maybe just give you something to walk away with a little bit. But the title of my message this morning is called The Art of Neighboring. And I am a little bit dovetailing my message to Pastor David last week, who did such an amazing job in encouraging us on what it looks like to be compassionate and many other things and how we live our life. But I wanted to just kind of step a little deeper into this idea of loving our neighbor. And I want to read this scripture to you as we start, and I'll pray, and we'll get real practical today. And again, I just pray you leave with something that would maybe encourage you, inspire you into your next journey. But I was just reading the scripture when thinking about this message, and we see in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is doing life, and he's about to get cornered by some religious people to try to figure out, like this whole thing, you got all these commandments and great commandments and things, it's really awesome, but like they're trying to trick him, like what's the greatest thing that we're supposed to be doing, and just trying to see what he would answer, how he would maybe share with somebody what the most important things we should be doing with our lives as followers of Jesus. And so here's we pick up in chapter 22, verse 34. It says, "But when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees," we find out earlier, if you read in that scripture, he has a habit of silencing religious people who were trying to trick him. But they said when they saw that he had silenced Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, I love that they mentioned that, of course, asked him a question to test him. And he said to him, and asked, "Teacher, Jesus, which is the greatest commandment in the whole law?" Like, what's the greatest? And it's kind of like they're waiting to see what he would say, see if they could stump him in his knowledge. And he says to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great first commandment." And I love that he doesn't stop there. He says, this is the great first commandment, and the second is like it, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments depend all of the law and all of the prophets. What I love a lot about this, in some essence, for some of you that have been coming to church, or maybe you don't come very often, church maybe feels complicated to you, this is a great verse for you, because Jesus kind of sums up what the two most important things you could ever do. And he sums up in some way what his expectation of what he desires in a relationship with us, that we would love him, that he would love us, that we would love each other with all of our heart, mind, and soul, our entire being. And then he I love that he alludes to not just his expectation of our relationship with him, but almost gives us a little bit of what our purpose is to be in our life. Like, I love that he speaks to that, because many of us, maybe when we follow Jesus, we're like, okay, I love you, but like, what am I supposed to do with all of this? And he's like, and so the second greatest commandment is that you would love your neighbor as yourself. And it almost, again, in a way, simplifies what our journey with Jesus is supposed to look like. You know, I don't know about you, but following Christ, I've often asked myself and wondered, even in this church growing up, what's my purpose? What does God expect from me? I mean, I'm following him, but am I supposed to do something with this? I mean, what is my purpose in all this? And in the scripture, he just says, man, would you love me with all your heart, mind, and soul? And with that love, would you share that love, that relationship that you have by loving your neighbor as yourself? It kind of in some senses, spoke to that inner core of what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And maybe that would do the same to you. But I don't know how you feel, but in today's world, everything is going so perfect today. I mean, isn't just like the news so nice? It's just like the nicest. Like, you ever turn on the news station? They're just like, today, good news for you today. The stock market's going up. And you're like, woo! Like, we don't get that, right? Like, right now, it's the most very tense. Some of you maybe are avoiding news because of the political landscape we're walking into. But could I just maybe offer that maybe, just maybe, we're living in a time and an era where loving our neighbor might actually be one of the most critical things that we could do as followers of Christ, especially towards the people who don't vote who you vote for. And I'm not saying, but if you have any issues with voting or politics, you can email Ryan at lifehousesa.com. This will not be a political message. But maybe, just maybe, God is calling us to love the people in our lives and our neighbors. Not just loving people who attend the same church you do and have the same ideologies. So what does it look like to love our neighbor? And again, I just really think this was God's picture and what he was encouraging these religious people who wanted do's and don'ts and wanted to trick him up just to simplify everything, that this is what I want people's lives to look like, that you would love me, that the church would love me, that us as individuals would love him with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and that we would love our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus, I pray today that your word would speak to us, that the example that we read of your life would inspire the way that we live and the way that we love. And Lord, I just pray today, whether we've known you for minutes or we've known you for years, God, would you inspire us to how we're supposed to live our life and love our neighbor? In Jesus' name I pray, amen. I want to kick this off with a story, and the story might sound a little silly, but I think it's going to set some context to this. I'm going to set a little bit of context for this idea of the art of neighboring. I think it is a little bit of an art. It's why I said it that way, because loving your neighbor seems really easy, but if I were to walk into your shoes and setting, it probably needs to be positioned as more like an art, the art of loving your neighbor, the art of neighboring. But I want to tell you about a little bit of my life. I come from a very competitive family. Any families competitive in this room right here? I mean, my family would beat your family, but that's fine. You can say you're competitive. But my family, we love pillow fights, and pillow fights was a thing in our house. We would often, it would start with just some simple pillow fights, some things in the corner. It would start with like pillows. You know how your mom has a couch or your grandmother has a couch that has way too many pillows? No one needs. You can barely sit on the couch, but they've got a bunch. So we got plenty of pillows in our house. We got like 17 pillows for a 2-seater couch, but you grab one and it usually starts with one little toss. It hits a sibling in the face, and my sister and I would have these little battles. But the fight would always progress, right? Because it wasn't enough to hit with just a little like soft throw pillow. It escalates, right? The competition escalates. And so you're trying to find the most vicious pillow. Usually it would graduate a little bit to the deer hide pillow that your mom bought that no one likes laying on. It's not comfortable. It's super gross on your back. You know what I mean? You know those pillows? Your family has one. It's probably got like one with like little bejewels or just something. It's like just for looks. But that's the pillow you want to get, right? Because that's the progression. And so we would get, whoever grabbed that one first. And then these fights would get bigger and bigger. I mean, they're just big pillow fights and they're fun. And we'd always the pillow that everybody in the house wanted was Dad's pillow. And you know Dad's pillow, right? Dad's pillow, it's gross. He never washes it. It's kind of musty, smells like, him, and maybe that's nostalgic for some of you, but it's gross. But dads always have the weirdest pillows. Like, they're like goose feather pillows that like your head just hits the mattress. Like there's not even any like support, but we have these pillows, right? And so dads, that's the pillow you want, because when you grab that pillow and you start slinging that sucker around, like those goose feathers get to one side and it's like, the weight and the momentum of heaven when it connects with someone's face, they encounter the Spirit right there. It's like boom, and they're awakened to their destiny. And so that's the pillow you want. And so I remember we would, several times, just like my sister was significantly younger than me, so it's a lot more fun when you're the brother, you get a little like launch angle and they get like some height when they move from the pillow. But one day my sister tried to outsmart me, and so we started the fight, and she didn't even go for the deer hide pillow. She ran straight to Dad's room. And so she's so excited. You can hear her giggling, and she's like, yeah, she runs in there, and you can hear like the pillow hitting the ground, and she's like running to get it, like all the goose feathers to fall. And I ran up to my room because I'm like, she thinks she can fool me. And so I'm running in my room and I'm just waiting for her. And so she comes in and I can hear like she's dragging the pillow up the stairs, and she runs in and she's like, ah, and she jumps off the bed and takes one hit. And I was like waiting. I was like, Lord, please align this moment. This is how it's supposed to go. And she lines in, she's got the thing, she's flying, she's literally in midair. And what she doesn't realize is that I have a beanbag. And so she doesn't realize that I had planned this moment. And so midair, she's got Dad's pillow, but I've got the beanbag that outweighs her probably by double. And I sling it with everything I got. And when it connected, it was like a seismic eruption shift, the whole earth shift. People were like, was there an earthquake happening? And it flew. She hit the wall, hits the blinds, falls down, some of the blinds break, and Mom, and I'm like, I didn't do anything. And that was a pillow fight. Now listen, I share this story, and here's the point. I'm like I mentioned earlier, I'm almost 40 years old. My sister's in her 30s, and obviously we don't pillow fight anymore. Thank goodness, right? We've matured out of some things, and I have a little daughter right now who's 3 years old. The girl does not like to wear clothes, and thank God she's going to mature out of the stage, right? Could you imagine her as a teenager? Like, I'm so sorry, guys. But it's just like we mature out of these things as young, in our journey in life. We mature out of like childish things. You wouldn't do that anymore. And so again, I don't mean to bring necessarily a spiritual, like trying to make it everything spiritual, but in our spirituality, in our walk with Jesus, we also mature out of things. Sometimes we mature out of things that are really good. We graduate from just expecting that whoever's on the stage is going to feed me all the time, and you graduate and you mature into this idea that God could actually speak to me on my own, that I can go get in the Word and find out what He says. And so that's good spiritual maturity, but unfortunately, sometimes we graduate or we mature out of things that God never told us to mature out of. We've matured out of sharing our faith. We've matured out of getting to know people who don't know God. We've matured into a life maybe where everything revolves around a Christian people, which is good. We come to church, we go to a small group, we get encouraged, we come to a class, we're being shaped, we're growing, and yet we don't know anyone who doesn't know Jesus. And so in a way, we've kind of graduated ourselves out of, unfortunately, things that God didn't want us to. And I think it's why young Christians, when I look at this, when I think about young Christians, people who just come to know Jesus, usually they tend to be the most effective people at sharing their faith or loving their neighbor, because everything for them is so new and raw and fresh, and they haven't matured out of it. And so they just they want to share that with people, even if it's sharing life, and they're so excited about what God is doing. And we see that even in Peter. Peter was one of Jesus' disciples. He followed Jesus around. He was excited to follow God, and he left everything, and he was like going around trying to do miracles and walking on water. He wanted to do everything that God did, but yet 3 years into his journey with Jesus, he's denying Jesus in front of people. He was even embarrassed to be associated with Jesus. Why? Because sometimes we mature out of things, and when we don't recognize it, the enemy will get us to mature out of things that God didn't want us to mature out of, and next thing you know, we just feel lost. We feel maybe that we've abandoned or lost some kind of sense of fire of something that God never told us to abandon. And yet what I love about even the Peter moment that I shared is Jesus finds him later on the beach and encourages him and forgives him and even tells him to continue to feed my sheep, continue to love my people, right? Like continue to do, you've got a calling on your life, so love people. And it almost put Peter back on the same trajectory of when he first followed Jesus. See, in that early scripture, Jesus shares to those Pharisees that try to corner him what he hopes that our relationship with him would look like and how he wants us to share that relationship with the world by way of loving our neighbor. And I think this is what really, if I'm going on a limb here, I think this is really what sharing our faith is. It's loving our neighbor with the same love that we have for Christ. It's bringing that love, that presence, that thing that we are so enamored by, that we bring that into the very crevices of relationship with the people all around us. And today, I just hope maybe I can help challenge, encourage, inspire you to what sharing your faith, AKA loving your neighbor, can look like in your everyday life, and why I titled this The Art of Neighboring. So let me set a quick scope of the issue we're up against. There's a research group called Barna. They do some great research. You can actually go Google their website. They have some amazing research they do on generational gaps and all kinds of things. And one of the studies they did that I thought was very fascinating is they went and they asked a large group of Christians a series of questions. And in this study, and this was done probably 10 years ago, so the data they're saying would probably be worse today. But the data that they found was that only 4% of the Christians that they asked had ever shared their faith. Had ever shared their faith with another human being, had ever shared in some way their faith with someone. And before before it maybe sounds like I'm being a little pretentious here that you haven't shared your faith. I remember the first time I read this, I was pastoring young people in Seattle, Washington, and my first reaction to this is like, good thing I'm not part of the 4%, or the 96% who don't share their faith. Like, I share my faith all the time from a platform and a microphone. And I started thinking about, have I ever shared my faith with somebody like my age? Like in a real relationship conversation, like a neighbor, a coworker, someone who didn't know God? And if I'm honest with you, I sat in that moment and I said, I'm part of the 96%. I don't think I've ever loved my neighbor that way. Of course I've loved people, but like, have I ever shared that love I had for God with the people in my life? And the truth be told, I hadn't. I'd only done it from a microphone and a platform, or again, and that's not to discount that. Obviously, young people have heard but I just again, in my individual journey, right? That doesn't discount church ministry and all of that, but I just thought, man, do I know how to do that? Do I know how to love people? Part of my, there's several excuses that started going through my head that many of you maybe have, Some people, now I may not fit this exact excuse, but there are some people who go, well, you know what? I haven't really shared my faith because I'm not outgoing enough. I'm a little introverted. Like, you're up there, you're talking on this mic. I could never do that. So I'm introverted. I'm just not as extroverted as you to do that. Or some people might genuinely go, I don't quite know how to share my faith, what that looks like. Do I get up in a room and hello, everybody at work? We're 5 minutes before we got to clock in. You want to read Romans? We don't know. Is it something that awkward? Is it loving people? What does that actually mean? Some of us would even make the excuse, well, I'm not really evangelistic or pastoral. That's like Ryan, Pastor Ryan up here. He's amazing. I don't have that gift. Or maybe you're like me, where I had this epiphany when I read that stat. I don't even know if I know anybody non-Christian that I'm in relationship with, that I genuinely could call today, besides a person at work that if I'm late, they could help me out, or they could cover a day for me. But do I have a and if I was honest, I was like, man, those are some of the excuses that keep us from sharing our faith. I don't even know if I know anybody. And I only share that last one because I think for those of us that do follow Jesus, that have been following from some time, that's the trap we can get into. Is that there's such good things that happen in the church, and there's classes that shape us, and there's small groups that help us find community, but where it gets really dangerous is when it isolates you away from the people God's calling you to love. And so do we know anybody? And so I think we've been duped as a church. I'm just putting myself in this, so if you feel like I'm talking at you today, I'm talking to myself here, but I think we've been duped and tricked that sharing our faith is more than sharing his presence and our love for him with those we engage with. That we have to somehow have a certain set of skills or be in some good place or have all the answers, or maybe you got to know more before you can share that love or love your neighbor. But the truth is that they're just all excuses and they're bad. And so maybe a question you might ask, and this might be the whole sermon for you, and I haven't even got into Jesus real quick, but the whole sermon might be summed up, and this might be the point where you can get up and like, that's all I needed for today, I'm leaving. Please don't leave, that's awkward. But something we may need to ask ourselves honestly before we talk about neighboring and how to neighbor is, does our faith or relationship with Jesus invade our everyday life? Like, think about it. The way you process, the way you talk, the way you think, how you act, the things you do. Does it look different outside of here? Like who you are when your coworkers are around, when you have a dinner, when you invite people into your space, or you're in their space and you're having an after work lunch or whatever, or dinner, whatever that may look like. Like, does the love of God, do you really love God with all your heart, mind, and soul? Like, is it everything so you just can't help it, just flows into all that you are? Or have we compartmentalized our love with God to only certain areas? Only certain places where that shows up. Well, it shows up here, but I'm just kind of like Peter, maybe. I'm just a little bit embarrassed that it shows up here. So maybe today we need to ask that question and ponder that question and maybe put it before the Lord and say, God, why have I compartmentalized you? And maybe that's the sermon for you today. I just need to find a way to find that this love, a genuine love, hopefully you're here at a genuine desire to grow Jesus, that like, God, could you help that invade the everyday parts of my life? Maybe that's the sermon you need to walk away with today and go, that's what I need. I need to decompartmentalize God out of these areas of my life and let him invade everything. But if I may, let me make the assumption today that we love Jesus and that we want to love our neighbor. And so my prayer today is that today would be an encouragement on how. And that there really is an art to this. And how do we learn to love our neighbor? And I think that there's no better example of loving our neighbor, no better artist to learn from than Jesus. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the pastor. I know that's the pastor thing. Let me give you the greatest example, Jesus. That's the answer. My sons learned that, like the all answer to everything is Jesus. I'm like, that is not sometimes true, but it is true. Yeah, I guess it's true. But he gives us a great blueprint, an interesting blueprint to how he lived his life and how he loved his neighbor. And I'm going to share 3 key things. There are more things that Jesus does that if you could just study his life, he's fascinating in how he lives his life here on earth as a man. And but I wanted to make light of 3 that I see him do a lot. And these are things you see throughout Scripture. I'm going to share a few stories, but I could probably, I don't have enough time, but I could show you 5, 6, 7, 8 stories of each one of these examples of Jesus doing this all the time. And so what I'm going to share with you is 3 things, and these are not stepping stones. These aren't like the 3 steps to loving your neighbor, but they're simply rather just places, spaces, and actions that we see Jesus take advantage of that led to opportunities for people to come to know Jesus. And I want to maybe share that with us today. And the first one is the art of lingering. This idea of lingering is something fascinating to me that we see Jesus do. And I'm going to go right into this one. The art of lingering, and this one involves your time, right? Like lingering in a place that you don't want to be in involves your time. But here's a scripture that I think is really fascinating in Mark chapter 5, verse 24. And these will be familiar stories to you, many of you. But it says he went with him, and a great crowd followed Jesus and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. Now, let me stop for a minute. Jesus is on the way. He's got this huge crowd, and they're around him, and he's on the way to somewhere. And if you read the verses before this, he's on his way to heal a man named Jairus' daughter. So he's on his way to heal a woman who is on her deathbed. Like she's got like time is not on her side. It's very serious, and he's on his way there. So he's got this crowd of people going to heal Jairus' daughter with him. But as he's going through, the crowd followed him. There's a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians, had spent all she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. In verse 27, she had heard reports that about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd. So she's like hiding and touched his garment. For she said, if I even touch his garments, I'll be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And I love that the story doesn't stop here, because that in and of itself is incredible, right? She took a moment of faith, and the power of God healed her. That's the power we have even today in Jesus, that God can heal that way. But Jesus does something really interesting, and he does this a lot in Scripture. In verse 30, and Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? Now, mind you, he's going to say, like, heal a woman who's on her deathbed. Like, he doesn't have time. Hurry, hurry, hurry. You're busy. Go. And yet he stops to ask this question, who touched me? And his disciples said, you see the crowd was pressing on around you. Who touched me? Like, we don't know. And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, that she was healed, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. I mean, essentially, she just had this moment and then came down and told him, I don't know what the whole truth means, but she's telling him everything, like her whole life. Like, there's more, you healed me, but I'm telling you the whole truth of what I'm going through. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. See, Jesus has this encounter. He lingered. He had somewhere to go, really important. And yet he lingered longer. Now, for those of you worried about the story, they come to him afterwards even. I love this, but they're like, hey, she's dead already. Like, this lady you went to go heal, that you stopped for this thing and you lingered, like, she's dead already. And he goes and he heals this woman anyway. But I love that Jesus takes this moment to linger just a little longer, not because she needed another healing from her blood issue, but he wanted to get to know this woman, of which she told the whole truth, because he stopped and lingered, and he helped her with something even deeper, and that he left her with peace. He left her with something that she was dealing with that was deeper than just the issues of blood. But see, it cost Jesus time, Time. It cost him time. And time is one of those things I don't like to give out freely. I don't have much of it, and time is very costly. And yet Jesus, time and time again, no pun intended, gave up his time and lingered in spaces that feel a little awkward to linger that long. But see, I think culture is fighting against us as people. If you go, anybody maybe can relate to this, but if you go down, think about houses that were built in the 20s, or built, 100 years ago, they don't look anything like the houses we have today. You know what I mean? If you go down to the Pearl or the Historic District downtown San Antonio, my dad happens to live down there, and the houses, they have a couple features, but one feature that is very obvious on almost every house that you see that is built 100 years ago. And do you know what it is? A porch. Like a front porch. When I go to my house, I live in Encino Park, which my house was built in the 80s. Those are kind of old. I have a porch about the size of this table and a door that I can barely fit a refrigerator through, right? Like, that's the porch. But something changed, right? Back in the day, you used to be able to sit on the front porch and, hey, Fred, and hey, Carlos, and you could just like talk and experience neighbors, and you ran into each other. And now what do we have? You come into these neighborhoods, you go to TPC, or you come into Stone Oak, and even neighborhoods around here, and they all have a garage. Some neighborhoods even have a gate. So you have a gate, you have a garage, and you have, you pull in, and the garage shuts, and you got a teeny porch. And where does all of our festivities happen? On the backyard, right? Because with our 8-foot privacy fence, and nobody can see us, and we can have our pool, right? And we've become a very private society. Now, this isn't us as Christians. This is just society. It's fighting against us in this idea of loving our neighbor, because many of us may not even know our neighbors. Some of you may have lived in a place for 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even a decade, and you just know the neighbor as the creepy old lady with the weird car that pulls into her driveway, or the guy with the crazy dog that lets it loose off the lead. Like, we know people by the things they do that annoy us. Or do we really know people and our neighbors? And I'm not just talking about physical neighbors, but even at work and things like that. But new homes today, right? It's the garage doors. We come in, we shut our garage, we go into our houses, and I think it's my guess, and I'm taking a lot of liberty here by saying this, but I think it's why we have a how are you society, like shallow society. You know what I mean by that? How are you? What's everybody say? Good. How are you? Good. 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 Right? Even at church, hey, how's it going? Good, man. How are you? Oh, we're good. Good. All right, end of conversation, right? And it's happening now where we have a difficult time even pressing into, are we really good? Or do we need something this moment? I had a gentleman at the first service who came and asked me something deeper about my life and asked me how I was and said, no, how are you doing with all that? And I got to share with him. But like, he wouldn't have known that if he's just like, how are you? And I was like, good. And he's, how are you? Good. All right, good. We'll see you next week. And And so there's something that's fighting against us culturally to really engage people and love our neighbors at a deeper level. So what is lingering? I think this is time that we give in spaces longer than we prefer. Whether that's time on your porch, whether that's on your walk when you're walking your dogs in the evenings, because we can't walk during the day because we'll burn. But you walk your dog and you take a little bit longer, right? When you see a neighbor come by, you don't like switch sides of the street, to avoid the neighbor who talks a lot. Grocery store lingering. You've ever see that when you see someone that's kind of has common ground, but you're like, it's kind of awkward, and so you just kind of like move around each other in the door. But it's not being in a hurry. Lingering is this idea that you're just not in a hurry. The people, I see it all the time. Like we try to avoid, as you know, we try to avoid people that are going to be like a longer conversation. I don't really have the time. I got something to do. I'm in a hurry. See, lingering takes your time, and sometimes time that you feel you don't have or you don't want to give up. And I think our biggest challenge is just the excuses we put in there that we don't have time. But we say we don't have time, but we definitely have time to binge watch our favorite shows. We don't have time, but we wouldn't dare miss a college football game with Texas beating ULM. We don't have time, but we wouldn't dare miss the Cowboys right after church at 3 p.m., right? We wouldn't do that because we have time for that. We just don't have time for you. And so we got to be careful when we say our excuse is that we don't have time or don't want to give it away, but we do have time. It's just uncomfortable to let people invade our time. And there's something that when we fall in love with Jesus, with all of our heart, mind, and soul, we feel compelled to give of our time and love our neighbor as ourselves. And I think of this, Jesus just always lingered in spaces. I mean, I could name you 5, 6 stories where he lingered. At the woman at the well, he lingered. When the woman who was being accused of adultery, he lingered and drew the line in the sand. He just lingered longer than everybody else was comfortable doing. And it always opened up space and opportunity for there to be love and conversation. And here's why that's important. I think lingering provides you the adequate time you need to see people for where they really are. And I'm just going to put myself in this statement here, so I'm not talking at you, but we are so guilty as people of running next to people all day long and have no idea what they're suffering through. How many of you have ever gone on Facebook and you had a coworker who you don't talk to that much who posted something really traumatic of something going on in your life, and the first time you heard about it was a Facebook post, and yet you work with this person 40 hours a week, every year for the last 5, 6 years, and you're like, I had no idea that your family had cancer or that someone in your life was dying or that you had to deal with this traumatic divorce. Like, I had no idea. I thought things were just good. And that's what lingering does is it presses into some spaces to see people for who they really are and where they really are. So I live in a neighborhood right now. I live in Encino Park, as I already shared. And my neighborhood right now, it's a lot of young people, young families, and then a lot of retired folks. And what I found out about retired folks is they have a lot of time. And they love to talk. And they've been in these neighborhoods for longer than I've been alive. And they've got lots of stories. And the house I lived in was owned by a 3-generation rancher back in whatever. And I've realized that, like, when you live in a space where lingering is a priority, you have to choose either to ignore them or to linger. And so I've chosen to linger a little bit longer in my neighborhood. And honestly, the funniest thing, and some of you will laugh at this, is lingering in a retired community or where there's a lot of retired folks in there has turned into random people who don't know you walking into your house. Like, retired folks just love to, like, oh, cool, you're remodeling your house. Can I walk in? And I'm like, oh, yeah, my name's PJ. And what's your name? And it's like, you just, like, do I just trust you because you're retired? I don't know. But I remember when we were remodeling our house there in Encino Park, and I had a neighbor, a gentleman that walked in and said, can I come see it? And I'm like, sure, and you let this person in and you linger a little bit longer. But I want to show you the story because this was a gentleman who's got tons of stories that every time I lingers, not 5 minutes, it's like 15 minutes. My wife's like, why were you out the side so long? And I'm like, sorry, he was talking to me. But he ended up at my house one time, and he said, oh, I want to see this deck, and hey, we'll help you fix it. I know there's some deck when the guy was here, whatever. He had a whole history lesson. And when he comes back through my house, he noticed I had this art installation in my wall, in my living room of Bibles. It's like these alabaster Bibles, and they're like cool magazines. I made it look like an art installation. I'm not doing it to witness to anybody or to have some weird bait and switch, like, have you heard about the Lord Jesus Christ? Here's a Bible. But they're these cool like magazine things. I like reading the Bible. It's kind of cool and fun. And so he saw that, and when we went out to the front yard, him and I, we left the front door, and he walked through the house, and he had asked me, he said, hey, I'm assuming you guys are you guys following, Christians? Do you go to church? And I asked him the same thing. What about you guys? Do you guys have a faith? And he said, well, we've been searching for a church. I was like, oh, well, how long you guys have been searching for a church? And he said, 20 years. Does it sound like somebody searching for a church or somebody who's searching for God, right? And so just interesting, because over the course of lots of these lingering moments and conversations and seeing things has led to him sharing things with us and my wife and I about how he's got some heart issues and some things he's battling through in his health. And he made this statement to me the other day. Him and I were golfing together, and of course, thanks, Pastor Ryan. But he came and he said, I just want to say thank you to you and your wife. You guys have been so kind, to my wife and I, and you've invited us in, and just, you golf and do all that stuff. And he said, but, the other day I was sharing about my heart stuff, and that was really hard for me to do. And he said, just the way your wife touched my shoulder. He said, it just like, I've never had someone touch my shoulder that way. Just like something different, and she just touched his shoulder just to like console him, when he was talking. And you just never know, right? Like if I just was the neighbor who didn't have time for my neighbor who loves to give me a history lesson every time we talk, then those moments would never happen. And again, I'm sharing that with you not to say, oh, look at me, but that's what sharing our faith is like. It's just when God invades all of our lives, then you're just sharing that with people. It just comes by nature, and you're not giving them a scripture verse or a Bible off my wall. Sometimes it's just a conversation and a touch on the arm that begins a journey for somebody else into knowing Jesus. So what does it look like for you to linger in the spaces that God has you in, your work, your school, your neighborhoods? The second one we see is the art of conversation, and Jesus does this really well, and these are all about intentions. And for sake of time today, I'm going to give you the references to these scriptures. They won't be up, but you can write these down if you want to read more. They're incredible stories. But the art of conversation, and this is about like intention. Jesus knew how to I feel like he just kind of had a secret skill to like just converse with people in a certain way that got them to just tell them everything. You know what I mean? And so we see this. He meets this woman at the well who's from Samaria. I mean, technically speaking, in that culture, Jesus being a Jew going to meet with this lady from Samaria was like off limits. But Jesus was lingering in some spaces that felt uncomfortable for other people to linger in. But not only did he linger because he needed something practically, he needed, water, and that's what he was waiting for at the well, and this woman came to draw water from him. It kind of like, sometimes you got to go to the grocery store and get stuff, and you kind of linger a little bit longer maybe to meet somebody who's getting the same thing you're getting, and you have a conversation. But it opened up. He asked her about her life, and it became revealing when he pressed into a conversation with her about her life. He finds out that she's got 5 husbands. And the man she's living with isn't even her husband. And she tells all this to him, like, hey, I'm just sharing my heart here, and this is what I'm struggling with. And it came just by way of waiting for water and having a simple conversation. Somebody revealed, and so again, there's power when you that a conversation can do in someone's life when you press in, because it shows, one, your intention, that I'm not just here to be transactional with you, but I just, if I can be a help to you as a fellow human being, as someone who loves God, I want to do that. And so I'm having a conversation, and you'll be surprised at what a simple conversation can do. See, conversations show if you care. It show if you want more than surface level. It shows that if you want a relationship. I think conversations, when done right and with purposeful intention, should always lead to some kind of relationship. And I think that's why this part is the most difficult, is because it leads to relationship, or it should, and all of us don't have enough time, and we have enough people in our life, or we just don't know if we want that person in a relationship. And so we don't have a conversation because we don't know what it'll unopen. But I would say you could even call this, instead of the art of conversation, you could even call this the art of getting a phone number. And I know this sounds funny, but when's the last time as a grown adult you met somebody random and had a conversation and ended it with, can I get your phone number? I would love to connect again. Now, I say that to you because that's awkward. It's weird in today's society to be like, hey, can I get your number? Like, especially for some of us guys, right? We're out somewhere and it's like, hey, man, cool. Oh, hey, nice shirt. Cool, golf shirt. Hey, can I get your number? Right? Like, it's like we're asking someone on a date. Like, it's awkward. But I use that as an example, not to say we should get everybody's number, but it's this idea that, like, what if we met people with the intention that maybe there's a reason why we bumped into each other? Maybe there's a reason why we're here. But I think we as adults, we struggle with new relationships, especially I think here in San Antonio. My wife and I were in Austin for several years. And Austin's a very transient city. People are moving from all over the country and people are desperately wanting to meet new people. So it's almost easier in places like that are so transient, to like want to meet new people, want to have new relationships. But San Antonio, I mean, pretty much every person I graduated with from San Antonio Christian School still lives here. And they grew a family here, and they still run businesses here, and they still work here, and they've never left. And what happens with that is you have this society, this city where people have their friend groups, and it's very difficult to like break out of those friend groups, you know? And so as adults, you know, having conversations with people, it's difficult to kind of break through those awkward things, but it's imperative if we want to love our neighbors that conversation has to be part of it. And even if you're introverted, I'm sorry to say, but it's going to take some courage from you to step out and have a conversation with someone in order to break that tide. I think this art takes the longest to develop for all of us. I think it's awkward because there's lots of steps to making plans, saying no, getting rejected, having conversations, becoming friends even. But I think our biggest challenge in this is either impatience, I don't have the patience for this, or what I call the benefits game. And I'm guilty of this, right? Does this benefit me in any way? Like, I don't know if it's going to make me better, so I don't know if I really want this relationship. We make those excuses as Christians all the time. And I just newsflash for you, most people that Jesus encountered, probably all the people Jesus encountered, neither helped or benefited him. I mean, he met people because there was an overflow of love. It didn't have a direct benefit for him on earth, but he did it because he was genuinely in love with his Father, and he was in love with the people around him. I want a quick story, and then I'm going to end with the last point. There was when we moved to Austin, we kind of had to move under night cover. We didn't get to move during the day, so it was like our truck showed up in the middle of the night, and we had that crew where you're trying to convince all the people you have relational equity with, any coins in that bank, to please come help me move. And it's like the worst phone call we can all receive. When you're like, please help me move, and you're like, okay. And I had to convince people at 10 o'clock at night to come help me move. And so people were coming in to help us get out of our U-Haul truck. And two, what I didn't know who they were, but I know now that they were two doors neighbors of ours. And the woman was very pregnant, like just about to have her baby. And honestly, I was really busy. I was tired. It was 10 o'clock at night. I did not have, but we had a habit of like lingering and having conversations, because you never know what a relationship or friendship will do. And we struck up a relationship, found out she was like due that week, and they were out there at 10 o'clock at night trying to work that baby out. And my wife, we had just had our son, and so my wife's over there giving her tips and telling her all the things. And so it became like this whole friendship. And this started years of conversations. Again, we didn't go to church together. We didn't have a similar faith upbringing or background. But it began a year of friendship, a year of sharing baby tips, a year of watching each other's dogs when we went on vacations, years of sharing conversations on our back porch and dinners, and years of genuine relationship, and ultimately ended up with one day, the wife asked late at night if she could come over and talk with my wife and I, and she felt comfortable enough in our house to even hop herself up on our counter, just like help herself up with her feet hanging from our kitchen, and started sharing that she had felt like that there was something pulling her that she needed to bring her family to God. And it began this whole thing, and she was crying on her kitchen. But again, it was just a conversation. It was kind of the longevity of relationship that developed a moment that I didn't even ask her. She was bringing it to us, right? She didn't come to church with us. She knew that there was some love that we were bringing from Jesus that felt different to her. And when that came down, we ended up having some faith conversations. So again, I'm sharing that story not to show you the end result, but just to show you what happens when we invite God into those spaces. And the last one is this. And this is what I call the art of dinner. And these are what I call your sacred spaces. Mark chapter 2, and this is the one where I actually can find dozens of stories of Jesus doing this, but Jesus is often caught having dinner with the most crazy of people. Like, religious people are even mad sometimes. So this story in Mark chapter 2, they're like, the Sadducees and Pharisees are like mad because he's eating with people, like bad people. Like, you shouldn't be doing that, right? Like, you should be eating with people who love God and who are Christian, but you shouldn't be eating with those people. And yet here he is, he's eating dinner. And I just want to make this statement. Maybe it's obvious to you, but it wasn't really obvious to me when I was reading this. Is like, it's one thing to have maybe a surface level relationship with someone you don't know, or that someone that's maybe far from the faith or belief system that you're in, or, I mean, again, mind you, a political leaning. It seems pretty crazy to me that you'd end up eating dinner at the same dinner table. Do you know what I mean? But I mean, this is what we're seeing, is that Jesus is like lounging with these people. Like, he's not like astute and having like a quick, Bible reading. He's like lounged. They catch him lounging and like enjoying these people's company. So there's some trust factor and build factor that they've invited each other. Sometimes we catch Jesus in his home. Sometimes we catch him in other people's homes. But he's in sacred spaces. He's in these people's most sacred of spaces, because I believe there's something that happens in sacred spaces where God moves faster than any other space in your life. And here's why. There's something intriguing about sacred spaces. Here's what sacred spaces are. Sacred spaces are the areas of our lives that we only allow people in that we trust. I would probably argue that your dinner table is a very sacred space, right? Your bedroom's a very sacred space. Like, there are sacred spaces that some are not appropriate for us to invite people into, but for your family, right? There's some sacred spaces, vacations or time or places in your home that like feel very sacred. Why? Because it's the place where you get to just be you. And if people invaded that, it feels kind of like a violation. You know what I mean? And if you don't get what I'm saying, have you ever met the solar panel door-to-door salesman that comes to your house? Now, again, I'm so sorry if you are a solar panel door-to-door salesman. You are called by God to do what you do, and blessings on you. But when that person comes to your door, have you ever just like instantaneously, when you open that door and you see that they have the solar thing on there and they got the clipboard and, hey, how are you doing? I'm just around the neighborhood. I just talked to your neighbor Susie, and I just want to know. And how many of you like instantaneously go like, you're coming to dinner with me, dude, right? No, it's like a total violation, right? It's like, dude, I'm in my like slippies, like I'm like in the middle of like dinner, my kids are screaming, and you're like, I've told you no 8 times, and you're like, I knew you'd say no, so now I'm gonna tell you another sales pitch. And you're like, I said no to the sales pitch. Well, now this is a sales pitch for the people that said no to the original sales pitch and no to the second one, so this is the third one. And you're like, dude, no, right? And then the trick is just so like, let me go get my wife, and then you, just kidding, don't do that to your wife. My wife would love to talk to you about this for another 25 minutes. But that shows you, right? Like, it feels like a little bit of a violation of your sacred space, right? Because there's no built trust there. It's just a person invading this like space, and you feel territorial. Some of you, please, as Christians, be nice to those people, but some of you get really territorial. You put your sign up, no soliciting, and stay away, because it feels like you're violating some sense of my privacy. And yet, these are the sacred spaces where people have the most transformation. I think when we think of relationships that God has put into our lives intentionally, I ask you, as I ask myself, how many of those people have you built enough trust with that they could end up at your dinner table? Maybe a better question is, how many of those people have you built trust with that they'd invite you into theirs? See, I think the biggest challenge for many of us is the fear of letting people in deeper. For fear of what they might find out, fear of how you clean or don't clean, fear of how they see what you look like behind closed doors and not all did up. See, dinner isn't that special. In fact, most of us have dinner every night, but to invite someone into that space, it doesn't just take an invite. It takes trust that you have to build with someone, maybe by way of lingering, maybe by way of intentional conversations, but ultimately should end up in a sacred space where those conversations happen. I told this at the first service, but my wife had a lifelong friend of hers that happened to be in Austin with us. Not with us, but she was there irrespective of us, and we just happened to reconnect. They were friends in Washington State together, and she happened to be there, but we just were very intentional about building relationship, having conversation. She wasn't following God at all, and yet over the course of friendship and conversation and lingering and really intentional conversation, the funniest thing of this whole thing is she ended up at our dinner table when her husband was leaving her. And she ended up at our dinner table, and what she wasn't asking for us in that moment was to fix her marriage. She was asking us to fix her heart. And she said, I think I need Jesus. And in that moment, we led her to Jesus at a dinner table, because at that moment, there's nothing else to hide when you're at someone's dinner table, right? We're past this. We're in this sacred space, and you're invited to ours and ours yours. There's just something real. And in that moment, it led her to feeling real enough to share something intimate, and it led her to Jesus. She came to church every week after that. She raised her hand every week for at least 6 or 8 weeks. Like, yes, Jesus, I'll say yes to Jesus. Yes, but she was just so enamored. But it started with just a conversation. Not an invite to church, not an invite to, but like an invite into our home. That began a journey. And so where may Jesus be challenging you to invite someone deeper into those spaces? This is how I'm going to close. Not all these stories, I know, I purposely told you stories that I know the last one ended with someone coming to know Jesus, but most of these stories didn't end that way. And I told you that on purpose because newsflash, he didn't say the 2 greatest commandments are loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul and converting people to Christianity. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. So it's our job to help them see the love of God so that they may come to know Jesus. But there's not a hook, line, and sinker here. There's not a track that we sneak them out the door. Like, it's just that we would be genuine in our love for people. And that love that we have for God that's genuine, that's with our whole mind and soul, like it starts to invade how we love others. But I showed you those because I didn't want the stories to make you think, well, I could never do that. I wanted the stories to maybe inspire you, where maybe you just have made an excuse of why you don't step a little deeper. And I want to tell you this last story, my friend James. My friend James, some of you might have heard this story, but I want to tell you how I met him. This might be a shocker to you, but I was golfing, and I was golfing. I golfed every Friday in Austin. I had a membership at our local course that we lived on, and I went every Friday after work. And I often went by myself. I didn't have anybody to like play with, and so I often was by myself. They would just pair me up with 3 other random people that I never met. But one day I was out putting. I was getting ready. My tee time was like 10 minutes, and so I was warming up and I was putting, and I hear this. I'd just gotten back that summer from Ireland with my dad. We went on a golfing trip, and I hear this thick Irish accent, and this guy, talking, and I'm not even going to try to attempt to do it, but it was very obvious he was from Ireland, and he was talking to this other gentleman, and because the other gentleman had asked the awkward question that none of us asked, where are you from? And he's like, I'm from Ireland. And then they started talking about Ireland, but I just lingered. Like, I had to go to my tee time. I could have literally packed up my bag, jumped in the cart, headed, and go. But I decided to just linger a little longer, and I started putting my ball a little closer because I was interested. And I wasn't, again, I'm not telling you this because I was trying to have some like secret agenda. I just was like, this sounds like a cool guy, I have something in common, and we'll connect. And as soon as the other guy was done talking, he's like, oh, cool, man, well, enjoy your day. And then I leaned in, I said, hey, did you say Dublin? Is that where you're from? He's like, yeah. I was like, I just got back from there. And we started talking about Dublin. And we talked for, 5 or 6 minutes, and they yelled out our names that we had to come on the tee box. And I said, hey, I know this sounds awkward, but I said, hey, I'd love your number because I never have anybody to play with in these things. And I'd love like a consistent playing partner, to play if you're open. And he's like, I don't have anybody either. Sure. So again, I had the weird like date moment, can I have your number? But we exchanged numbers, right? And in my mind, I'm thinking like, how we do as people, we take a number and we forget their name and we lose it in our phones and we don't really call them. But I was like, well, we'll see, it's somebody that I'd be interested in. And I didn't expect that like 25 minutes later, I'd get a text. And he was in a cart with a bunch of really bad golfers, a bunch of Pastor Ryans. No, kidding, Pastor Ryan. And he said, hey, sorry, man, I wanted to see, is it okay if I, do you want to play today? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, let's just hop out of the cart like halfway through and we'll just jump in the cart together and we just finish our 9 holes. And I was like, sure. So I had to like awkwardly break up with my playing partners, like, hey, I'm going to hop out. I got a friend of mine. Then we're going to hop in the car. And we got in the car. And that began playing golf together every Friday for 2.5 years. And playing golf together, playing in tournaments together. And that began conversations about life. I found out he had a fiance and they were trying to have babies. And so come on, we'd have dinner together. We'd go on double dates and they would talk about, all the things they're struggling through or thinking about. And just a lot of conversations, a lot of friendships. Again, mind you, no church, just like this all happened just in the regular timing of our life. And I remember I got a phone call from Pastor Ryan. I wasn't living here at the time, but Pastor Ryan said, we got this golf tournament, Columbia, and Ryan's trying to rig the thing and win every year. So he's like, do you want to come play and bring somebody good? And so I said, sure, I'll bring my friend. I'll see if my friend James wants to go. And I called James. He's like, sure. And so in a way, I kind of invited him into like a sacred space of mine, right? because that space is a little bit sacred for me. It's like my church life and church people and like church relationships. And it's kind of awkward, like, because that's a very sacred space sometimes. And so I invited him into it. And we had to ride together from Austin all the way to Canyon Springs golf course. And the whole way down, he was asking me, what's this church thing we're doing? Like, what's it for? And I was like, oh, well, they send missionaries to Colombia and they build, medical boats and all that stuff. And, I love what they're doing. It's a church on mission. They're not just a church that preaches sermons, but they like put their money where their mouth is and they do things around the world. And he literally asked me the question on the drive here to the Columbia tournament, do you want to know why I don't go to church? And I said, I would love to know why you don't go to church. And he began a series of conversations with me about the abuse he felt and some of the how he felt like the church had kind of failed him in Ireland and that there wasn't accountability and just these like hurts and pains. And he had said to me, you're the first person I met that follows the Christianity or God that I could get behind, right? And again, I tell you the story about James because I would love to say that I led him to the altar in Lifehouse, at the Columbia tournament, and he's like, Lord. But something happened in his heart because I lost my mom in 2019. And when you lose somebody so precious to you, you don't really care to take many phone calls. And most people, to be honest, they're scared to call you, so they just send a text like, I'm praying for you, so sorry for your loss. I mean, again, people are being nice, but it's difficult. And he called me. And I answered, and I didn't know what he would say. And he said, hey, I just, I don't know what to say, but I just want to tell you that I'm sorry. And I feel like maybe the only thing I can give you is just to pray with you. And he prayed with me and asked that God would be at peace in a time of hardship. And I just think about this whole story. And it started with putting a little bit closer to someone else's ball on a golf course, asking an awkward conversation, grabbing a phone number that felt really awkward to ask for, that turned into a friendship where God can do the work only he can do. And I can love him as myself. But I wanted to end with this scripture because I always come back to this as what he's called us to be as the church, not the church of Lifehouse, but as individuals who make up the church. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are a light of the world, a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and they put it under a basket, but they put it on a stand so that it gives light to all in the house. And in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to the Father who is in heaven. My prayer for you today is that you would see that you are the light of the earth, that you're God's plan A for his message going to the earth. And all he asks us to do is to love him with all his heart, our heart, mind, and soul, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. So I don't know where God's speaking to you, where you may need to linger, where you may need to have more conversations more intentionally with the people God's put in your life, or maybe someone you just need to simply invite to dinner. But my prayer is that we would recognize that God's got a purpose for you as a follower of Jesus, no matter how long you've been following him or not. That Jesus has a plan for your life, and he has a plan for us to be the light of the world.